army population that's aging very rapidly. If you were elected governor, what would you do to both inspire and support young and beginning farmers?
Yeah, and I'll go back again. It's a signature piece, so I keep bringing it up because I'm very proud of it. We wrote it together. I carried it with Jeff Fortenberry, a Republican from Nebraska. The beginning farmer rancher legislation that put money into education, it put set-asides into access to capital, it put set-asides into the programs so that you could get into those programs. It made changes, again, if you wanted to traditionally crop from some of the historical averages that you needed to be able to get crop insurance, whatever it might be. I think those are the things that we can do. One of the things that I talked about is using the traditional system to not pit us one against another. I know that many of you understand this very deeply, that when we have crop insurance on certain crops, we incentivize people to grow those crops versus others that maybe should be growing there. So we've always made the case, instead of maybe going after and saying we shouldn't have that we should expand it into crops that we can. Expand it into canning crops. You can grow green beans and tomatoes and have some underlying, because what the crop insurance basically does, all of you in here know, that's the guarantee for your capital. If you can't, that's how you get the bank to give you the loan to do what you're going to do. And I think here in Minnesota, maybe we need to set up something. I think Iowa, Gary and Tom maybe know a little bit more about this. They have a system of where they have statewide crop insurance on a certain level, I believe, that they implement. So I think there's some ways to possibly do that, to incentivize. We're trying to do some things in this latest farm bill, troops to farm, trying to get young people back on the land, but it is really dependent on, and I think, again, you're probably feeling this. I even see it, my young son, who's a sixth grader's talked about this or whatever. He wants to be a farmer. He thinks it looks like really funny. He said they have big houses and they work outside. That's the way he sees it. He doesn't, because he goes to grandma's house and he sees these old farmhouses and stuff. But I do think there's a whole generation that would really like to get into this. But I mean, if you were my age and my generation, if you didn't have a parent, if it wasn't a farm in your family, you didn't even think about it. I mean, there would have been a better chance of becoming an astronaut than becoming a farmer because you didn't have access to that capital. I think what the state can do is start to incentivize ways to make that happen. There's some tax credit increments, some things that we can do, but I'm really concerned about this too, because what folks on the land, and there's many of them in here, will tell you, if their family's not staying on the land, who's the next one to come? How's it going to be? And we end up know what happening is we end up having consolidation. We just get bigger and bigger who can end up buying these things, and it just boggles my mind when I see, land that going for $12,000 to $15,000 an acre, and we have people using, the offsets on taxes who sold a high-rise building in Chicago and needed to have a tax deduction for it, and they can use that and shift that directly over to offset their tax base by buying farmland and then rent it out. There's some distortions to how that's working, and I think we need to figure out a way to try and keep, and again, we're market-based people, but we're also human beings, so you can use foresight and compassion in the decisions that you make, some way to figure out how do we get young folks back on the land.
Another question that came up was...
And if I could add on that,
yeah.
One of the ways we could do that is making sure that they have health care so that they can farm without having to pay for that. That would be a big thing.
So that's actually the second question.
Anticipation there.
So I know Farmers Union has done a bunch of these town hall meetings, but one of the most frequent concerns we hear from farmers in rural communities, young farmers, immigrant farmers, is the concern about the affordability of healthcare. So as governor, how will you help all these communities meet their healthcare needs?
Well, first and foremost, and I am not letting anyone, especially in this gubernatorial race, get away with answering a question any more about healthcare unless you say whether you think healthcare is a basic human right or not. Because the minute you say it's not, now we're trading it like a commodity, like a microwave oven. It is not. It's a basic human right we need to deliver. We know that the system doesn't work the way it needs to as effectively. We do believe that we need to triage on short-term accessibility, that I believe that Minnesotans should be able to buy into Minnesota Care, regardless of where they're at on that 400% of federal poverty limit, to give them some of that access. With that being said, I am absolutely reject the notion that this nation spends twice as much as any other country and gets half the results in our healthcare. Most of that money goes to people who aren't providing healthcare, they're providing paperwork and insurance and other things that do it. So the first thing we'll do to make sure that they get that is that you can't be guaranteed. And let's, again, if anybody says they want to repeal and go back to before the ACA, that means that everyone who has a pre-existing condition is discriminated on. And if anybody wants to come on TV and run an ad and say that's not true, they are lying. That is called lying. I don't say that very often, but it is lying. You are not gonna get health care if we go back before that if you have a pre-existing condition. I think that is both morally reprehensible and I think it's economically stupid. So I think one of the first things we can do, especially with young people, is make sure they have access to Minnesota Care, either because of not having the adequate income to get on, or even if it's a little too high to get them on. Then I think we need to have an honest conversation in this state about what are the drivers of healthcare in the first place. I would say that this panel that was right up here and the questions they asked are doing more to reduce healthcare costs than any other conversation we've had in the last 10 years. It starts with food, it starts with activity, it starts with ways that we approach wellness much more holistically. That's why we talk about full service community schools, about getting a well-rounded person, a healthy person, one that can go forward. And so as far as getting them on the land, give them accessibility to affordable care, and we've said it, if you show me another way, 14 of the top 16 industrialized nations in the world who have better outcomes than us and spend half what we have, do have a single payer system. So if you want to demonize that or whatever, but here's the thing, the system that they're advocating for is broken, doesn't work, is super expensive, and discriminates against people. The single payer systems that are operating out there do tend to keep costs down. And again, I saw the other day, my opponent brought in a doctor from Canada to tell us it doesn't work. Well, I've got a cousin in Calgary says it's fine. Does that count? You know, you're going back and forth. We need to use science behind it. We need to make sure you have access to it. And I think this is one of the things that are keeping people out of farming. And this economic growth of this, again, tying healthcare to your employment, I really think is stopping an explosion in economic growth. That if you had the capacity to leave your job and your insurance was portable with you and affordable, I think people would branch out and try different things. I think there's a lot of people staying in current employment because of that, and who can blame them?